They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I served mine with a court order, a tow truck, and my husband's face when I hand delivered the check from selling his precious BMW, the one he bought his girlfriend with my stolen retirement money. My name is Maria Marshall. I'm 68 years old, and 3 weeks ago I discovered that my husband of 45 years had forged my signature to steal $85,000 from my retirement account. He thought his grieving, trusting wife would cry quietly and forgive him like I always had. He was wrong, but before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this, and if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps give me the strength to speak my truth. Now let's get into my story. I found the bank statement on a Tuesday morning while balancing our checkbook, something I'd done religiously since 1978. There it was, $85,000, gone, vanished from the account I'd built with 40 years of 12-hour nursing shifts, double overtime, and every sacrifice I'd made so Robert could chase his failed business dreams. My hands shook as I stared at the numbers. Robert was in the shower, humming some tune I didn't recognize, probably something his 28-year-old girlfriend had taught him. I called the bank immediately, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. Yes, Mrs. Marshall, the withdrawal was authorized with proper signatures on March 15th. Proper signatures, Robert's and mine. Except I'd been in Atlanta that week, helping my sister recover from surgery. I never signed anything, and we both knew it. When Robert emerged from the bathroom, toweling his salt and pepper hair with casual confidence, I was sitting on our bed holding the statement. He stopped dead when he saw my face. "Morning, honey," he said, but his voice had that careful quality of a man caught red-handed. I held up the paper. $85,000, Robert. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. Just sighed and sat down like we were discussing dinner plans. "Maria, I can explain." "Explain how you forged my signature to steal my retirement money?" That's when he told me about Candy. Yes, Candy, because of course that was her name. 28 years old, blonde, needed a car, and my 70-year-old husband was happy to be her sugar daddy with money that took me 4 decades to save. "It's a BMW convertible," he said, like that justified the theft. She deserved something special. The audacity hit me like a physical blow. While I drove my 12-year-old Honda with the broken air conditioner, he'd bought his mistress a luxury car with my money. Money I'd saved for our retirement, for our future, for the security I'd worked myself to the bone to provide. "How long?" I asked. "6 months, maybe 7. 6 months of late nights, mysterious phone calls, and working overtime, while I sat at home wondering why my husband had stopped looking at me like I mattered. "The car's already purchased," he continued with something almost defiant in his voice. "Paperwork's done. It's in her name." That's when I realized this wasn't just betrayal. This was war. And Robert Marshall had just made the biggest tactical error of his life. He'd underestimated his opponent. The woman sitting on that bed was about to show him exactly what 40 years of nursing crisis management could do when properly motivated. "Her name is Candace, actually," Robert said, as if using her full name made stealing my retirement fund somehow more dignified. "And I didn't steal anything. That money was for both of us." I stared at my husband of 45 years. This man I'd raised 3 children with. This man I'd supported through 2 job losses and a heart attack, and I didn't recognize him. His face had taken on that stubborn, petulant expression I'd seen him use with bill collectors and traffic cops, but never with me. "Robert, that was my individual retirement account. My name only. Money I earned working double shifts at the hospital for 30 years while you figured out what you wanted to be when you grew up." He flinched at that. Good. Let him remember all those years I worked as a registered nurse, coming home with aching feet and patient stories, while he bounced from one business opportunity to another. Let him remember who really built our nest egg. I was gonna pay it back, he said, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. Candy needed a car, and I thought, you thought you'd buy your girlfriend an $85,000 car with money that took me 40 years to save? I stood up, the statement crumpling in my fist. What kind of car costs $85,000, Robert? It's a BMW convertible, a nice one. She deserved something special. The audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been driving my 12-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door, he'd been planning to buy his mistress a luxury car with my money. Money I'd saved for our retirement, for the trips we'd talked about taking, for the security I'd worked myself to the bone to provide. How long? I asked quietly. How long what? How long have you been sleeping with her, Robert? How long have you been planning this? He was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. Then, 6 months, maybe 7. 6 months. 6 months of him coming home late with excuses about working overtime at the hardware store he managed. 6 months of him being too tired to talk about our retirement plans. 6 months of him looking at me like I was furniture he'd grown tired of dusting around. And the car? It's already purchased, he said, and there was something almost defiant in his voice now. The paperwork's done. It's in her name. That's when I realized this wasn't just betrayal. This was war. After Robert left for work, kissing my cheek like he had every morning for 4 decades, like nothing had changed, I sat at our kitchen table and made a list. Not a list of grievances or tears or broken dreams, but a list of facts. Cold, hard, actionable facts. Fact 1. The money came from my individual retirement account, established in 1982 when I realized Robert's financial planning consisted mainly of hoping things would work out. Fact 2. My signature had been forged, which made this not just adultery, but fraud. Fact 3. I was still the primary account holder on all our joint accounts, including the checking account Robert used for his day-to-day expenses. Fact 4. The BMW was purchased with my money, which made it as much mine as it was hers. Fact 5. Robert had no idea that I'd spent 30 years as a nurse, learning to think clearly under pressure, making life and death decisions, and dealing with lying, manipulative people. I called my lawyer first. Patricia Williams had handled our wills and estate planning for years, and she'd always struck me as the kind of woman who didn't suffer fools gladly. When I explained the situation, her response was swift and decisive. Maria, this is financial fraud, plain and simple. We need to move quickly before he can do any more damage. Can you come in this afternoon? Next, I called the bank. Since my name was on all the accounts, I had every right to freeze them pending a fraud investigation. The customer service representative was more than happy to help, especially when I mentioned the forged signature. Mrs. Marshall, we'll put an immediate hold on all accounts associated with your Social Security number. No withdrawals can be made without your physical presence and identification. Then I called my sister Denise in Atlanta, not to cry or complain, but because Denise had been through her own divorce 10 years earlier and had learned some things about protecting assets that might come in handy. Girl, she said after I'd explained everything, you need to document everything, every receipt, every bank statement, every text message, and whatever you do, don't let him know you're planning anything. Men like Robert think women like us will just cry and forgive. They never see the storm coming. By the time Robert came home that evening, I had appointments with a lawyer, a private investigator, and a real estate agent. I'd also transferred what was left of our joint savings, about $23,000, into a new account in my name only. But I was still sitting at the same kitchen table, still looking like the same woman who'd discovered his betrayal that morning. He had no idea that his faithful wife of 45 years had just declared war. Within 48 hours, Marcus Thompson had provided me with a file that changed everything. Photos of Robert and Candy at expensive restaurants, hotel receipts from their weekend in Asheville, and most damaging of all, clear images of Robert forging my signature at the BMW dealership. $147,000, Marcus said, spreading the evidence across Patricia's conference table. That's what your husband has spent on this relationship in 6 months. I stared at a photo of Candy celebrating next to her new BMW, Robert beaming beside her like a proud sugar daddy. In another, they were kissing in a hotel parking lot, Robert looking younger and more alive than I'd seen him in years. There's more, Marcus continued. He's been researching divorce lawyers for 3 weeks, firms that specialize in asset protection. The timeline clicked. This wasn't impulse, it was premeditated theft. Robert planned to clean out our accounts, secure his girlfriend's loyalty, then divorce me and disappear to start over. He was going to blindside me, I said quietly. But he made a fatal error. Patricia smiled coldly. Federal fraud before filing for divorce. We have him dead to rights, and now we're going to destroy him legally. I looked at the photos again. My husband of 45 years spending my life savings on a woman younger than our daughter. He thought I was a foolish old woman who would cry and accept whatever scraps he left me. He was about to learn that this foolish old woman had spent 4 decades managing medical emergencies, and she was very, very good at strategic warfare. That evening, I cooked Robert's favorite meal, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, the same Sunday dinner I'd been making for our family since 1979. I set the table with our good china, lit candles, and even opened a bottle of wine. He walked into a scene that looked like a celebration. "What's all this?" he asked, his eyes cautious but pleased. Maybe he thought I was going to forgive him, accept his betrayal with the same quiet resignation I'd shown through his other failures. "I've been thinking about what you said," I replied, serving his plate with the same gentle attention I'd given him for decades. About Candy, about the money, about everything. He relaxed slightly, cutting into his chicken. And? And I realize you're right. $85,000 isn't that much money in the grand scheme of things. We've got plenty saved up. The lie came easier than I'd expected. Robert smiled, the first genuine smile he'd given me in months. "I knew you'd understand, Maria. You always do. That's what I've always loved about you." What he'd always loved about me was my willingness to clean up his messes without complaint. But tonight I was done cleaning up after Robert Marshall. "I do have one question, though," I said, refilling his wine glass. "How exactly did you manage the withdrawal?" "I was in Atlanta that week, remember." "Oh, that." He waved his hand dismissively. "I just signed your name. Banks never check that stuff too closely, especially for longtime customers like us." There it was, a full confession, delivered over his favorite dinner. I smiled and nodded like the understanding wife he expected me to be. "That makes sense. Very clever of you." After dinner, I did the dishes while Robert watched television, feeling more relaxed than he had in weeks. He had no idea that our conversation was being recorded by the small device Marcus had given me, or that by morning, his comfortable little world would be turned completely upside down. I went to bed early, claiming a headache. Robert kissed my forehead and told me to feel better, then settled in to watch the late-night news. As I lay in our bed, listening to him laugh at some late-night comedian, I thought about all the nights I'd fallen asleep to that same sound, believing I was married to a good man who loved me. Tomorrow, he'd learn what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you trusted completely. And unlike me, he wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late to stop it. I was up at 6, as I had been every morning for the past 40 years. Robert was still sleeping, snoring softly with the satisfied contentment of a man who believed he'd gotten away with something. I made coffee, read the morning paper, and waited for the banks to open at 9. At exactly 9:01 a.m., I called Robert's bank, the one where he had his personal checking account, his credit cards, and the small business account for his hardware store management consulting. I identified myself as his wife and requested that all accounts be flagged for suspicious activity pending a fraud investigation. Mrs. Marshall, I see here that you're listed as the emergency contact on all these accounts. What type of suspicious activity are we looking at? Forged signatures on withdrawal slips. I have documentation that my husband has been using my name without authorization to access retirement funds. I'd like all his accounts frozen until this can be resolved. I'll put the hold in place immediately. Mr. Marshall will need to come in with proper documentation and a police report if he wants to access any of these funds. Next, I called Robert's credit card companies. Since we'd been married for 45 years, I was listed as an authorized user on everything. I reported the cards as potentially compromised and requested new cards be issued, to my address only. By 9:30, Robert Marshall couldn't access a single dollar of his own money without my permission. At 10, Patricia filed the criminal fraud complaint with the district attorney's office. The evidence was overwhelming: forged signatures, documented theft of retirement funds, recorded confession. The DA's office agreed to expedite the case given the clear evidence and the ongoing nature of the fraud. At 11, Marcus served Robert with a subpoena to appear in court the following week to answer charges of financial fraud against a spouse. I was home making lunch when Robert's truck screeched into our driveway. He came through the front door like a tornado, his face red with confusion and rage. Maria, what the hell is going on? The bank says all my accounts are frozen. Someone served me papers at work. My boss wants to know if I'm some kind of criminal. I looked up from my sandwich, my expression as calm as if he'd asked about the weather. Oh, that. I reported the forged signatures to the authorities. You know, the ones you used to steal my retirement money. You can't do this. That money was ours. Actually, Robert, it wasn't. It was mine. And what you did was called fraud. Federal fraud, as it turns out, since it involved retirement accounts. He stared at me like I was a stranger, which, in a way, I was. The Maria Marshall he knew would never have fought back like this. She would have cried and forgiven and tried to hold the family together, no matter what it cost her. But that Maria Marshall had died the moment she saw that bank statement. The woman standing in this kitchen was someone new entirely. You're insane, Robert said, pacing our living room like a caged animal. Absolutely insane. I'm your husband. We've been married for 45 years. You can't have me arrested over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I sat down in my chair, the one I'd sat in countless evenings while he told me about his day, his dreams, his fears. Robert, you forged my signature to steal $85,000 from my retirement account to buy your girlfriend a sports car. What part of that is misunderstood? The part where you act like that money was only yours. I worked too, Maria. I contributed to this household. It was fascinating watching a man rewrite 45 years of history in real time. You contributed what, exactly? Your salary from the hardware store that barely covered the mortgage? The money you lost on that failed restaurant investment? The gambling debts I paid off with my nursing income? His face was turning purple now, veins standing out on his forehead. I had some bad breaks, but I always provided for this family. Robert, I have the tax returns going back 20 years. You want to know what your average annual income was? $28,000. You want to know what mine was? 62,000, plus benefits, plus the overtime I worked to build that retirement account you stole from. I'd done my homework during those long nights when he was out with Candy. Every tax return, every pay stub, every financial document we'd ever filed was now organized in neat folders in Patricia's office. The numbers didn't lie, even if Robert did. That's not the point, he said, but his voice was weaker now. He knew I was right, and he knew I could prove it. Then what is the point, Robert? That after 45 years of me supporting this family, you felt entitled to steal my money to buy presents for your girlfriend, that you forged my signature like I was already dead? I was going to pay it back. With what money? Your salary barely covers your car payment and your lunch is out. Oh, wait, I know. You were planning to divorce me and take half of everything in the settlement, including the house I paid for with my nursing salary. The look on his face told me I'd hit the target. Marcus had been right about those internet searches. Robert had been planning this for months, maybe longer. How did you? He stopped himself, but it was too late. How did I find out about your divorce research? The same way I found out about the hotel receipts, the restaurant bills, the apartment rent you've been paying for Candy. Robert, you may have forgotten this, but I spent 30 years managing crisis situations in an emergency room. Finding information and planning strategies, that's what I do. He slumped onto the couch, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. What do you want, Maria? I want my money back, all of it. Every penny you've spent on that girl, plus the 85,000 for the car. I don't have it. The money's gone. Then you better figure out how to get it back. Because, Robert, this is just the beginning. The next morning brought devastating revelations. Patricia spread receipts across her conference table, like evidence in a murder trial. Maria, he's stolen over $140,000. Look at this, a $3,200 diamond bracelet bought the same week you asked about fixing the air conditioning. My hands trembled as I picked up the jewelry store receipt. While I'd been eating leftovers and worrying about utility bills, Robert had been buying his mistress diamonds. Marcus knocked and entered with fresh photographs. They're not just spending your money, they're planning a future. Real estate office looking at Florida condos. The photos showed Robert and Candy with a real estate agent examining property listings. Retirement communities, Marcus confirmed, starting at $200,000. They were planning to make an offer this month. The betrayal cut deeper than theft. While I'd worried about our retirement security, Robert had been planning a different retirement entirely, with someone else using my money. He wasn't just leaving you, Patricia said, her voice tight with anger. He was planning to leave you destitute while he started over in Florida sunshine. I stared at the photos of my husband planning his golden years with his girlfriend. The audacity was breathtaking, stealing my life savings to fund their dreams while I struggled with grocery bills. What are our options? I asked. Patricia smiled coldly. We're going to destroy him, legally, financially, completely. And we're starting with that BMW. The car? Purchased with your stolen money? We're taking it back. Today? Technically, it's not repossession, Patricia explained as we sat in her car outside Candy's apartment complex. Since the vehicle was purchased with stolen funds, it's recovery of stolen property. Very different legal standing. I watched through the windshield as Marcus approached the shiny blue BMW convertible parked in the designated spot for apartment 12C. He had all the necessary paperwork, court orders, documentation of the fraud, and a sheriff's deputy who looked bored but official. Mrs. Marshall? The deputy, a young woman who reminded me of my daughter, approached our car. We're ready to proceed. You'll need to identify the vehicle as the one purchased with your funds. I got out of the car and walked over to the BMW. It was beautiful, I had to admit. The kind of car I'd always admired but never thought I could afford. The leather seats were pristine, the paint job flawless. There was even a little bow tied to the rearview mirror, probably from when Robert had presented it to her. Yes, I told the deputy, this is the vehicle purchased with $85,000 stolen from my retirement account. Marcus was attaching the tow truck cables when Candy came running out of her apartment building. She was even younger than I'd expected, with long blonde hair and the kind of figure that comes from having 30 years fewer birthdays than me. Stop, you can't take my car. That's theft. The deputy stepped forward. Ma'am, I need you to calm down. This vehicle was purchased with fraudulently obtained funds. We have a court order for its recovery. But it's mine. Robert bought it for me. It's got my name on the title. Yes, ma'am, and the money used to purchase it was stolen from Mrs. Marshall's retirement account. The title transfer will be voided as part of the fraud case. Candy's eyes found mine across the parking lot. I expected hatred, anger, the fury of a young woman watching her sugar daddy's generosity evaporate. Instead, I saw something worse. Pity. You're her, she said, walking over to me. Robert's wife. I am. You know, he told me you were sick. Said you had dementia and didn't understand money anymore. Said he was just trying to protect you from making bad decisions. The lie hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Robert stolen my money and cheated on me, he'd told his mistress I was mentally incompetent. He'd destroyed my dignity, along with our marriage. Did he also tell you he forged my signature to access that money? I asked quietly. Candy's face changed. He said you'd agreed to it. Said you wanted him to have something nice for once. I was in Atlanta taking care of my sick sister when he made that withdrawal. I never signed anything, and I never agreed to anything. The tow truck was lifting the BMW now, its shiny blue paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. Candy watched it go with tears streaming down her face, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. What am I supposed to do now? She asked no one in particular. I suggest, I said, walking back to Patricia's car, you find yourself a boyfriend who doesn't steal from his wife to buy you presents. As we drove away, I could see Candy in the side mirror, standing alone in the parking lot, crying over the loss of her stolen car. I didn't feel sorry for her anymore. I felt free. That evening, Robert came home to find me sitting in the living room with a cup of tea and a small digital recorder on the coffee table. He looked exhausted, older than his 70 years, like a man watching his carefully constructed lies crumble around him. They took the car, he said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. I know, I was there. He slumped into his chair across from me, the same chair he'd sat in every evening for decades, telling me about his day while I listened with what I'd thought was love, but now recognized as enabling. Maria, we need to talk about this. Really talk. I pressed the record button on the device. Go ahead, talk. This thing with Candy, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. I never meant to hurt you. But you did mean to steal my money. He was quiet for a long moment. I felt old, Maria. I felt like my life was over, like all the good parts were behind me. And then I met Candy, and she made me feel young again. So you decided to buy that feeling with my retirement savings. I thought, I thought you wouldn't miss it. You never paid attention to the accounts anyway. You always left that to me. The casual dismissal of my intelligence was stunning. Robert, I've been balancing our checkbook since 1978. I know exactly how much money we have and where every penny of it came from. I built that retirement account with 40 years of 12-hour nursing shifts while you bounced from job to job. I know that. I've always known that. Then how could you possibly justify stealing it? He looked up at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse mixed with the desperate cunning of a cornered animal. Because I knew you'd forgive me, he said quietly. You always forgive me, Maria. When I lost money on the restaurant, when I got fired from the bank, when I crashed your car and didn't tell you about it for 3 weeks, you always just fix things, clean up the mess, make it right somehow. The admission hung in the air between us like poison gas. 45 years of marriage, and he'd just admitted that he'd counted on my love to enable his selfishness. And if I hadn't found out, if I'd never seen that bank statement, I would have paid it back eventually. With what money, Robert? Your part-time salary? The Social Security you won't be eligible for another 2 years? I would have figured something out. No, you wouldn't have. You would have taken more and more until there was nothing left, and then you would have filed for divorce and taken half of what remained. His silence was answer enough. You've changed, Robert said the next morning over a breakfast I'd prepared with mechanical precision. Eggs over easy, wheat toast, orange juice. The same breakfast I'd made him every Saturday for 45 years. No, Robert, I've woken up. He pushed his eggs around his plate, not really eating. The Maria I married wouldn't have done this. She wouldn't have had me arrested, wouldn't have taken the car. She would have worked with me to fix this. The Maria you married was 23 years old and didn't know any better. She thought marriage meant supporting your husband no matter what he did, no matter how much it cost you. And now? Now I know the difference between supporting someone and enabling them, between love and exploitation. I poured myself more coffee, noting that my hands were steady now. The shaking that had plagued me since discovering the theft had stopped. Anger, I'd learned, was a remarkably stabilizing emotion when it was righteous. I called Candy last night, he said quietly. I waited. She's furious. Says I lied to her about you agreeing to the money. Says I made her an accessory to fraud. You did. She's threatening to cooperate with the police. Tell them everything about the money, the trips, all of it. Smart girl, self-preservation is a valuable instinct. Robert looked up at me with something like fear in his eyes. Maria, if she tells them everything, if she gives them records of all the money I spent on her, you'll go to prison, I finished calmly. Yes, that's very likely. You can't want that. We have grandchildren, Maria. What will I tell them? You could start with the truth, that Grandpa stole Grandma's retirement money to buy presents for his girlfriend. They wouldn't understand. They would understand that actions have consequences, something you apparently never learned. I stood up and began clearing the breakfast dishes, a domestic ritual that had once felt like love, but now felt like muscle memory. Robert watched me with the expression of a man seeing his wife for the first time in decades. What do you want from me? He asked finally. I want my money back, all of it, every penny you've spent on her. You know I don't have it. Then you better figure out how to get it. Because, Robert, this is your last chance to make this right. The only thing standing between you and federal prison is my willingness to accept restitution instead of pushing for criminal prosecution. And if I can't get the money? I looked at my husband of 45 years. This man I'd loved and supported and enabled through decades of failures and betrayals, and felt nothing but cold, clear certainty. Then you'll find out exactly how unforgiving the federal justice system is to 70-year-old men who commit financial fraud. Patricia called me Monday morning with news that made me smile for the first time in weeks. Maria, we've identified significant assets that Robert can liquidate to pay restitution. His classic car collection, his tools, his golf club membership. It's all got to go. Robert had spent 30 years collecting vintage muscle cars, storing them in a climate-controlled garage he rented across town. He called it his retirement investment, though he'd never been willing to sell any of them when we needed money for practical things like home repairs or medical bills. How much are we looking at? I asked. Conservative estimate? About $90,000 for the cars alone. The tools and other assets should cover the rest. That afternoon, I drove to Robert's storage garage with Marcus and a court-appointed appraiser. Robert met us there, looking like a man attending his own funeral. The garage held 6 cars, a 1967 Mustang, a 1969 Camaro, a 1970 Chevelle, and 3 others I couldn't identify, but which gleamed under the fluorescent lights like expensive jewelry. Mrs. Marshall, the appraiser said, walking around the Mustang with professional appreciation, these are beautiful vehicles, well-maintained, mostly original parts. Your husband has excellent taste. Yes, I said, running my hand along the Mustang's hood. He always did prefer beautiful things he couldn't afford. Robert winced. Maria, please, these cars, they're my life's work. Your life's work was supposed to be our marriage, our family, our future together. You know what these cars mean to me. I know what my retirement savings meant to me. The money I worked double shifts to save while you were out here, polishing cars and dreaming about the good old days. The appraiser cleared his throat. Ma'am, I can have a complete valuation by Friday. Given the current market for classic American muscle cars, I'd estimate the collection's worth between $85,000 and $95,000. Almost exactly what he'd stolen from me. The symmetry was perfect. How quickly can they be sold? I asked. I have a network of collectors and dealers. For cars in this condition, probably 2 to 3 weeks for the entire collection. Robert was standing next to his beloved Mustang like he was saying goodbye to a dying friend. 40 years, he whispered. I spent 40 years building this collection. And I spent 40 years building our retirement fund, I replied. The difference is, I didn't steal your money to do it. As we locked up the garage, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. Robert was about to learn what it felt like to lose something precious, something he'd worked decades to build. The way I'd felt when I saw that bank statement 2 weeks ago. The classic car auction was pure theater. Robert sat in the front row watching his life's work being sold piece by piece, while I sat behind him, calm and satisfied. The 1967 Mustang he'd babied for decades went for $32,000. His beloved Camaro brought $28,000. Lot 20, the auctioneer called. 1971 Plymouth Cuda, numbers matching 446 pack. This was Robert's favorite, the car he'd spent 3 years restoring, the one he'd refused to sell even when we were behind on mortgage payments. The bidding was vicious. Sold for $47,000. Robert buried his face in his hands as his pride and joy was sold to a stranger. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. That was my retirement money being reclaimed, dollar by dollar. When the auction ended, total receipts hit $138,000, more than enough for full restitution. Robert approached me like a broken man. Are you satisfied? He asked. I'm getting there. Once that money is back in my retirement account, we can discuss criminal charges. And if I cooperate, then I might accept a plea deal instead of federal prison. He was quiet, then asked the question I'd been waiting for. After everything, is there any chance for us? I looked at this man who had stolen my future to buy his girlfriend's affection. Robert, you didn't just betray our marriage. You tried to destroy my future while planning yours with someone else. The man I married would never have done that. People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. This was months of calculated theft and lies. You ended our marriage the day you decided I was worth less than her happiness. His shoulders sagged in defeat. 45 years, reduced to a stranger selling stolen goods to pay back his wife. The divorce proceedings moved faster than I'd expected. With documented evidence of Robert's systematic theft and adultery, Patricia was able to file for an expedited dissolution based on financial fraud and irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. Maria, Patricia explained as we reviewed the settlement documents, given the circumstances, you're entitled to significantly more than half the marital assets. The court recognizes that Robert's fraud constitutes economic waste of marital property. The numbers were stark and satisfying. I would receive the house, my full retirement account balance, and 70% of all other marital assets. Robert would get his clothes, his remaining tools, and the debt from his failed business ventures. What about spousal support? I asked. Given his age and limited earning capacity, he'd normally be entitled to some consideration. However, his criminal fraud against you eliminates any claim to alimony. In fact, if he violates the restitution agreement, you could sue him for additional damages. I signed the papers with a steady hand, officially ending 45 years of marriage with my signature, the same signature Robert had forged to steal my money. The irony wasn't lost on me. Robert's lawyer had tried to negotiate, arguing that the settlement was too harsh, that his client deserved consideration for his years of marriage and contribution to the household. Patricia had shut that down quickly. Your client stole over $140,000 from my client's retirement savings to fund an extramarital affair, she'd said coldly. He's fortunate we're not pursuing criminal charges that could result in 5 to 10 years in federal prison. The restitution was complete within 30 days. Every penny Robert had stolen was returned to my retirement account, plus interest and penalties. The classic car auction had raised enough money to cover the full amount with some leftover, which would go toward my legal fees. On the day the divorce was finalized, I sat in the courthouse cafeteria with Patricia, drinking bad coffee and watching other people's dramas unfold in the hallways around us. How do you feel? Patricia asked. Free, I said without hesitation. For the first time in decades, I feel completely free. Any regrets? I thought about Robert, probably sitting in his tiny studio apartment, eating a frozen dinner, and wondering how his perfect plan had gone so wrong. I thought about Candy, who had found herself a new boyfriend within 2 weeks of losing her BMW, a man closer to her age with his own money. No regrets, I said finally, just relief that I finally woke up before it was too late. With my money restored and Robert out of my life, I did something that shocked everyone. I bought a stunning lake house with cash. The real estate agent couldn't believe I was paying the full $180,000 up front. This money was stolen and returned, I told her, writing the check with steady hands. I want it somewhere I can see it, enjoy it, and know it's completely mine. The house was everything I'd dreamed of but never thought I deserved. Master bedroom overlooking the water, modern kitchen with appliances that actually worked, living room with floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the space with natural light. But the best part was the silence. No lies, no manipulation, no one treating me like a burden. Just peace and the gentle sound of water against my private dock. My daughter Jennifer visited that first week, bringing my granddaughter Emma and homemade lasagna. We sat on the wraparound porch watching the sunset paint the lake gold. Mom, I owe you an apology, Jennifer said quietly. For what? For not seeing what Dad was doing. For assuming you'd just work it out like always. Sweetheart, Robert fooled everyone. He was good at being charming when people were watching. 9-year-old Emma looked up from her coloring book. Grandma, did Grandpa really steal your money? He did. And you got it back? Every penny plus interest. Good, Emma said with fierce satisfaction. Stealing is wrong, even from grandmas, out of the mouths of babes. My granddaughter understood something it had taken me 68 years to learn. I was worth fighting for. 3 months later, Robert's truck pulled into my lake house driveway. I was on the dock with wine and a book, enjoying the peace, when I heard his footsteps. He looked terrible, gaunt, unkempt, aged beyond his years. Hello, Maria. What do you want, Robert? He sat uninvited on my dock, feet dangling in the water. Candy left me. No surprise there. Sugar babies abandon ship when the money runs out. I'm sorry you're alone, I said carefully, but not sorry you're facing consequences. I've been thinking about us, about everything I destroyed. You didn't destroy it, Robert. You sold it. For a BMW and a chance to feel young. He stared at the water. Is there any chance we could? Number, there isn't. 45 years of marriage, which you ended when you decided I was worth less than her happiness, when you forged my name and planned to leave me destitute. I never would have left you with nothing. You already did. You erased me the day you stopped seeing me as a person worth honoring. Everything since then is just paperwork. After he left, I sat watching stars reflect on the lake water, thinking about how good it felt to finally be free. Not just from Robert, but from the version of myself that had enabled his selfishness for decades. The woman who discovered that bank statement was gone forever. The woman sitting on this dock was someone entirely new. Someone who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for less. At 68, I was finally living for myself. I took watercolor classes, made real friends who saw me as Maria, not Robert's wife. I volunteered at women's shelters, helping other victims of financial abuse navigate legal complexities. The hardest part, I told one woman whose husband had stolen her disability checks, is accepting that someone you loved treated you like an ATM, but once you accept that, you can fight back. My story reached beyond our small town. A local newspaper published my article about elder abuse. Then women's magazines picked it up. Soon I was speaking at conferences, helping other women reclaim their power. 6 months post-divorce, Candy Morrison called me. She looked different when we met. Older, more serious. I want to apologize, she began, for believing his lies about you. What lies? He said you had dementia, that you'd agreed to the spending. I never questioned it because it gave me the lifestyle I wanted. She paused. But watching how you handled everything, you weren't any of the things he said. No, I wasn't. He lied about everything, to both of us. I'm cooperating with the DA now, telling them everything about the money and gifts. I studied this young woman who'd unknowingly catalyzed my freedom. I don't hate you, Candy. I feel sorry that you wasted months with a man who had to steal to impress you. A year later, my children visited the lake house regularly. Mom, you seem so much happier, my son David observed. More like yourself. This is myself, I replied, for the first time in decades. My financial abuse consulting had grown into meaningful work. Law firms hired me to help them understand victim psychology. I'd started a scholarship fund for nursing students who showed promise but lacked resources. Most importantly, I'd learned to make decisions based on what I wanted, not what someone else needed. I discovered I liked jazz, spicy food, and staying up late reading mysteries. I was funny when not constantly worried about offending someone. The difference between alone and lonely became crystal clear. I was alone by choice, not lonely by circumstance. They ever had when Robert was around. Mom, you seem so much happier, my son David said during one of these visits. We were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching his kids fish off the dock. More like yourself. This is myself, I replied. For the first time in decades, this is actually who I am. My speaking engagements about financial abuse had grown into a small consulting business. Law firms hired me to help them understand the psychology of financial abuse victims, and women's organizations brought me in to educate their members about protecting their assets. The money was modest, but satisfying. Income I earned with my own knowledge and experience, not by enabling someone else's dreams. I'd also started a small scholarship fund for nursing students who showed promise but lacked financial support. It felt good to invest in young women who would build their own financial security through hard work and dedication. But the most satisfying change was internal. For the first time since my early 20s, I made decisions based on what I wanted, not what someone else needed. I bought clothes I liked instead of practical things Robert would approve of. I traveled to places I'd always wanted to see. I read books that interested me instead of watching television shows Robert preferred. I discovered that I liked jazz music, spicy food, and staying up late reading mystery novels. I learned that I was funny when I wasn't constantly worried about offending someone. I found out that I was actually quite good at managing money when I didn't have to compensate for someone else's poor decisions. One evening, as I was preparing dinner for myself and enjoying a glass of wine while cooking, I realized that I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt lonely. Alone, yes, but not lonely. There's a profound difference between the two. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was nearly 7 o'clock. When I opened the door, I found Marcus Thompson, the private investigator who had helped me document Robert's fraud. Mrs. Marshall, I hope I'm not intruding. I was in the neighborhood and wanted to check on you. Marcus, come in, please. How wonderful to see you. He stepped into my living room and looked around with appreciation. This place is beautiful. You've really made it your own. Thank you. Can I offer you some wine? I was just making dinner. I'd love some. As I poured wine for both of us, Marcus smiled. You know, in my line of work, I see a lot of people at their worst moments, discovering betrayal, facing divorce, losing everything they thought they could count on. Most of them struggle for years to rebuild. And, and you're the first person I've seen who didn't just rebuild, you built something better. You took a terrible situation and turned it into an opportunity to create the life you actually wanted. I had good help. You, Patricia, my family? No, Mrs. Marshall. You had good support, but you did the hard work yourself. You made the decision to fight back instead of accepting what was done to you. That took courage most people don't have. As Marcus left that evening, I stood on my porch looking out over the lake, thinking about his words. He was right. I had built something better. Not just a new life, but a better life. A life that was completely, authentically mine. 2 years after my divorce, I received an unexpected visitor. Jennifer arrived at my lake house on a Saturday morning with tears in her eyes and a bottle of champagne in her hands. Mom, she said, hugging me tightly, I have news. We sat on the porch with our champagne flutes, and she told me about her promotion to department head at the marketing firm where she worked. It was a position she'd been working toward for years, and she'd finally achieved it. But that's not why I'm crying, she said, wiping her eyes with a tissue. I'm crying because for the first time in my life, I have someone to call with good news who will be genuinely happy for me. What do you mean? Dad never celebrated my successes. He always found a way to make it about him. How proud he was, how his influence had helped me, how it reflected well on the family. You just listen and share my joy without making it about yourself. The observation hit me harder than I'd expected. I never realized. None of us did. We thought that was normal. Dad taking credit for everything good and blaming everyone else for everything bad. You were so busy managing his ego that you couldn't fully celebrate our achievements either. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Mom. Be proud. You broke the cycle. You showed us that we don't have to accept being diminished by someone who's supposed to love us. That afternoon, Jennifer helped me plant a garden behind the house. We worked in comfortable silence, our hands in the soil, creating something beautiful together. As we planted tomatoes and herbs and flowers that would bloom all summer, I thought about the life I was cultivating, not just surviving, but thriving. Mom, Jennifer said as we were cleaning up, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever miss him? Miss being married? I considered the question carefully. I miss the idea of him, the man I thought I married, the partner I believed he was. But that man never really existed. He was a story I told myself to make sense of a relationship that was actually quite one-sided. Do you think you'll ever marry again? I don't know. I'm not opposed to it, but I'm not looking for it either. I'm happy as I am, complete as I am. If someone comes along who adds to my life without trying to control it, maybe. But I'll never again sacrifice my own well-being for someone else's comfort. That evening, after Jennifer left, I sat on my dock with a glass of wine and my journal. I'd been keeping a record of this new life, documenting not just the events, but my thoughts and feelings as I rediscovered who I was. Today I realized, I wrote, that the woman Robert betrayed no longer exists. She was replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more free. I'm grateful to him in a way. His betrayal forced me to become the person I was always meant to be. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear children laughing and playing in the water. The sound made me smile, not with nostalgia for what I'd lost, but with appreciation for what I'd found. 3 years after my divorce, I received a call that would change my life again, though in ways I never could have anticipated. It was from the district attorney's office. Mrs. Marshall, this is Assistant DA Rebecca Chen. We've been building a case against your ex-husband for financial fraud, and we need your testimony. I thought that was resolved with the restitution. The restitution resolved the civil matter, but we're pursuing criminal charges. Your case helped us identify a pattern of financial fraud that extends beyond your marriage. It turned out that Robert had been running similar schemes with other women, using the same methods that had worked on me for decades. He'd convinced a widow named Eleanor that he was helping her manage her late husband's estate while systematically draining her savings. He'd talked a divorced woman named Sarah into letting him invest her settlement money, which he'd then used to fund his lifestyle with candy. We have documented evidence of over $400,000 in fraudulent transactions, Rebecca explained. Your case gave us the template to recognize the pattern. I felt sick thinking about other women going through what I'd experienced. The betrayal, the gaslighting, the systematic theft of their financial security. These women hadn't had my advantages: financial literacy, family support, and the resources to fight back. What do you need from me? We need you to testify about his methods, his psychological manipulation, the way he gained your trust, and then exploited it. Your testimony will help establish the pattern of behavior that proves this wasn't just a mistake, it was a calculated criminal enterprise. The trial was scheduled for the following month. Robert would face multiple counts of financial fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. If convicted, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. I spent weeks preparing my testimony with Rebecca, going through every detail of Robert's deception. It was painful to relive the betrayal, but it was also empowering to know that my experience could help protect other women from the same fate. Mrs. Marshall, Rebecca said during one of our preparation sessions, I want you to know that your willingness to come forward has been crucial. Many victims of financial fraud are too embarrassed or afraid to testify. Your courage has made it possible for us to stop him. The night before I was scheduled to testify, I sat on my porch watching the stars reflect on the lake water. Tomorrow, I would face Robert in court for the first time since our divorce. I would tell a room full of strangers about the most humiliating period of my life. But I wouldn't be doing it for revenge. I would be doing it for Eleanor, who had lost her home because she trusted Robert with her husband's insurance money. For Sarah, who was now working 2 jobs at age 62 to rebuild the retirement savings Robert had stolen. For all the women who had been betrayed by men they trusted, I would be doing it because sometimes the most important thing you can do with your pain is to use it to prevent someone else's suffering. The courthouse was smaller than I'd expected, and Robert looked smaller too. He sat at the defendant's table in an ill-fitting suit, his hair grayer and thinner than when I'd last seen him. He didn't look like a criminal mastermind. He looked like what he was, a desperate old man who had run out of lies. When Rebecca called my name, I walked to the witness stand with steady steps. I'd been nervous that morning, but now I felt only calm determination. This wasn't about Robert and me anymore. This was about justice for all his victims. Mrs. Marshall, Rebecca began, please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant. I was married to Robert Marshall for 45 years. I believed him to be an honest man, a faithful husband, and a partner in building our future together. When did you first discover that he had been stealing from you? I described finding the bank statement, the forged signature, the systematic theft that had been going on for months. I explained how Robert had gaslit me, moved my belongings, and tried to make me question my own sanity to cover up his crimes. Mrs. Marshall, how did the defendant's theft affect you financially? He stole $147,000 from our marital assets, including $85,000 from my individual retirement account, money I had saved over 40 years of working as a registered nurse. And how did it affect you emotionally? This was the hardest part. He didn't just steal my money. He stole my sense of reality, my trust in my own judgment, my belief that the man I'd loved for 45 years saw me as anything more than a source of funding for his fantasies. Robert's lawyer tried to portray his crimes as mistakes, as poor judgment rather than calculated fraud. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forged signatures, the pattern of manipulation, the way he'd targeted vulnerable women who trusted him. When I was cross-examined, Robert's lawyer tried to make it seem like I was a vindictive ex-wife seeking revenge. Mrs. Marshall, isn't it true that you initiated divorce proceedings immediately after discovering your husband's financial difficulties? I initiated divorce proceedings after discovering that my husband had committed fraud against me repeatedly over months while planning to leave me destitute. But you recovered all the money, didn't you? No lasting harm was done. I looked directly at Robert for the first time since entering the courtroom. The money was returned, yes, but the betrayal, the violation of trust, the knowledge that someone I loved for 45 years saw me as nothing more than a bank account to be emptied, that harm is permanent. Eleanor and Sarah testified after me. their stories heartbreakingly similar to mine. Robert had used the same techniques on all of us: charm, false concern, manufactured financial crises that required our help. He'd been a predator, targeting women who trusted him because of his age, his seeming vulnerability, his claims of love and commitment. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned with their verdict, I was sitting in the gallery with Eleanor and Sarah, holding their hands as we waited to learn Robert's fate. Guilty on all counts? Robert's shoulders sagged as the words hit him. He would be sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, effectively a life sentence for a man his age. As the bailiff led him away, Robert turned to look at me one last time. I saw no anger in his eyes, no defiance, just the hollow look of a man who had finally run out of people to blame for his choices. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, no joy in his punishment, just relief that he would never be able to hurt another woman the way he'd hurt us. 6 months after Robert's sentencing, I received a letter from Eleanor asking if I'd like to meet for coffee. She'd been struggling since the trial, not financially. She'd recovered most of her money through restitution, but emotionally. I feel so stupid, she told me as we sat in a quiet cafe downtown. How could I not see what he was doing? How could I be so naive? Because he was very good at what he did, I replied. Eleanor, Robert spent decades perfecting his techniques. He knew exactly what to say, how to behave, to make intelligent women trust him completely. But you figured it out. You fought back. I had advantages you didn't: financial knowledge, family support, resources to hire good lawyers. And even then, it took me months to fully understand what was happening. Eleanor was a retired teacher, a woman who had spent her career helping children learn and grow. Robert had targeted her specifically because of her nurturing nature, her instinct to help people in need. The hardest part, she said, is trusting my own judgment again. How do I know I won't fall for the next charming man who pays attention to me? You learn to listen to your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone rushes you into financial decisions, that's a red flag. If they discourage you from talking to family or friends about money matters, run. I'd been thinking about starting a support group for women who had experienced financial abuse. Eleanor's struggle convinced me it was necessary. Too many victims blamed themselves, felt ashamed of their vulnerability, isolated themselves rather than seeking help. 3 weeks later, we held our first meeting in the community room at my lake house. Eleanor came, along with Sarah and 2 other women who had heard about the group through word of mouth. We sat in a circle with coffee and cookies, sharing our stories without judgment or shame. The goal isn't to relive trauma, I explained. It's to reclaim our power, to remember that we are not defined by what was done to us, but by how we choose to move forward. Over the following months, the group grew. Women of all ages, from different backgrounds, united by their experience of financial betrayal. Some had been victimized by husbands, others by adult children, still others by supposed financial advisors or romantic partners they'd met online. We shared practical advice about protecting assets, recognizing red flags, rebuilding credit and savings, but more importantly, we shared strength. We reminded each other that survival wasn't enough. We deserved to thrive. I used to think my story ended when my husband stole my money, one woman said during a meeting 6 months after we'd started. Now I realize that was just the beginning of a better story. That sentiment became our unofficial motto. Not the end of our stories, but the beginning of better ones. 5 years after my divorce, I was invited to speak at a national conference on elder financial abuse. The conference was held in Washington, D.C., and the audience included lawmakers, law enforcement officials, social workers, and advocates from across the country. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, I thought about how far I'd traveled from that morning when I discovered Robert's theft. I was no longer a victim seeking justice. I was an advocate working to prevent others from experiencing what I'd endured. Financial abuse is often called a silent crime, I began, because victims are ashamed to come forward. We blame ourselves for trusting, for not seeing the signs, for believing that someone who claimed to love us could systematically steal our security and dignity. I told them my story, not just the facts of Robert's theft, but the emotional manipulation, the gaslighting, the way he'd used my love against me. I talked about the months of self doubt, the nights I'd wondered if I was really becoming forgetful and confused. But here's what I learned, I continued. Our shame belongs to the perpetrators, not to us. Our trust was a gift they chose to abuse. Our love was real, even if theirs wasn't. And our survival, our ability to rebuild and thrive, that's our victory. After my speech, dozens of people approached me with their own stories. Adult children who had discovered parents being financially abused, social workers dealing with epidemic levels of elder fraud, law enforcement officers frustrated by victims who wouldn't cooperate with prosecutions because they were protecting the very people who had victimized them. But the conversation that stayed with me was with a young woman named Ashley, probably in her 30s, who waited until the crowd had dispersed before approaching me. Mrs. Marshall, she said quietly, I think my mother is going through what you went through. Her new boyfriend has been asking her for money, getting her to invest in his business ventures. She's defensive when we try to talk to her about it. How long has this been going on? About 8 months. She's already given him at least $50,000 that we know of. When we express concern, she says we don't understand love, that he makes her feel young again. The pattern was depressingly familiar. Ashley, your mother is in what we call the honeymoon phase of financial abuse. The perpetrator is still providing emotional benefits, attention, romance, the feeling of being special. She can't see the exploitation because it's wrapped in affection. What can we do? Document everything. Keep records of the money transfers, the requests for funds, any changes in her behavior or lifestyle. Don't confront her directly. That will only make her more defensive. Instead, try to maintain your relationship so she has someone to turn to when she realizes what's happening. And if she doesn't realize it, then you may need to consider legal intervention, adult protective services, conservatorship proceedings, law enforcement if there's clear evidence of fraud. It's not easy, and she may hate you for it initially. But sometimes protecting someone you love means accepting that they'll be angry with you. As I flew home from Washington, I thought about all the women like Ashley's mother who were currently being victimized, who believed they'd found love when they'd actually found predators. I thought about the shame and isolation that kept them from seeking help, the way society often blamed victims for their own victimization. My story had become bigger than my personal experience. It was part of a movement to change how we think about financial abuse, to remove the shame from victims and place the responsibility where it belonged, on the perpetrators who exploited trust and love for financial gain. The lake house came into view as my taxi pulled into the driveway. Home, my sanctuary, purchased with money I'd reclaimed from a man who thought I was too weak to fight back. The irony still made me smile. Inside, I found flowers on my kitchen counter, a congratulations bouquet from my support group, celebrating my speech at the conference. The card was signed by 15 women, each of whom had rebuilt her life after financial betrayal. Thank you for showing us that we're not victims, the card read. We're survivors, and our stories aren't over yet. No, I thought, looking out at the lake where the setting sun was painting the water gold. Our stories definitely weren't over yet. 7 years after my divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a social worker at the federal prison where Robert was serving his sentence. Mrs. Marshall, I'm calling because your ex husband has been asking to speak with you. He's been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and he has perhaps 3 to 6 months left to live. I set down my coffee cup and walked out onto my porch, needing air and space to process this information. Robert was dying. The man who had stolen my future, who had tried to leave me destitute while he started a new life with a woman younger than our daughter, was facing his own mortality. Does he want something specific? I asked. He says he wants to apologize, to make amends for what he did to you and the other women. He's been participating in our Victim Impact program, working with a counselor to understand the harm he caused. I thought about Eleanor, now thriving in her own apartment and volunteering at a literacy program, about Sarah, who had rebuilt her savings and started her own consulting business, about the dozens of women in our support group who had transformed their pain into power. I'll think about it, I told the social worker. That evening, I called Patricia for advice. She was now a close friend as well as my attorney, and I valued her perspective on difficult decisions. Maria, you don't owe him anything, she said without hesitation. You've built a beautiful life, helped countless other women, turned his betrayal into something meaningful. You don't need his apology to complete your healing. I know that, but maybe he needs to give it, and maybe that's not your responsibility. She was right, of course. But over the next few days, I found myself thinking about the young man Robert had been when we first married, the man who had been excited about our future together, who had held our babies and promised to love me forever. That man hadn't been a lie, even if he'd been eventually consumed by selfishness and desperation. A week later, I drove to the federal prison. The facility was more depressing than I'd expected. Gray concrete and razor wire, the institutional smell of disinfectant and despair. Robert looked ancient, his body ravaged by cancer and 7 years of prison life. We sat across from each other in the visiting room, separated by a table, but connected by 45 years of shared history. He tried to smile when he saw me, but it was a shadow of the charming expression that had once made my heart flutter. Maria, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for coming. The social worker said you wanted to apologize. I do. But first, I want you to know that I see you clearly now. Maybe for the first time in decades. You look radiant, happy, free. I was wearing a blue dress I'd bought for my granddaughter's graduation, and my hair was styled in a way Robert had never liked, but that made me feel confident and attractive. He was right. I was happy, genuinely happy in a way I hadn't been during our marriage. I am happy, I confirmed. I'm glad. I spent so many years trying to dim your light because it made me feel inadequate. I stole your money because I was terrified of growing old, of being seen as a failure. I betrayed everything good in my life because I was too much of a coward to face my own mediocrity. Robert, please let me finish. I destroyed our marriage, hurt you and our children, victimized innocent women, all because I couldn't accept that I was never going to be the successful, important man I thought I deserved to be. He was crying now, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. I threw away 45 years with a woman who was stronger, smarter, and better than me in every way. And for what? A few months of feeling young with someone who didn't even know my real name? Your real name? I told Candy I was a successful businessman, that I owned the hardware store instead of just managing it. I told her I was a widower because I was ashamed to admit I was married to someone I was stealing from. Everything about our relationship was built on lies. We sat in silence for several minutes. Then Robert reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his palm. Maria, I am profoundly sorry for what I did to you, for the theft, the betrayal, the years I wasted your love and trust. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. Yes, I said quietly. I did. Can you forgive me? I looked at this dying man who had once been my husband, who had given me my children and grandchildren, who had also caused me more pain than anyone else in my life. The anger that had sustained me through the divorce and trial had long since faded, replaced by something more complex. Not love, but not hatred either. I forgave you years ago, Robert. Not for your sake, but for mine. I couldn't build the life I wanted while carrying that anger. Thank you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing. What you did was inexcusable, and the consequences were appropriate. I know. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to say I'm sorry, to tell you that you were the best thing in my life, and I was too stupid and selfish to appreciate it. When visiting hours ended, I stood to leave. Robert struggled to his feet, clearly in pain but determined to show respect. Maria? I turned back. I hope you know that the woman who fought back, who rebuilt her life so beautifully, she was always there. I just spent 45 years trying to convince both of us that she didn't exist. I know, I said. I know that now. As I drove home from the prison, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected. Not closure exactly, I'd found that years ago, but a final laying to rest of the marriage that had defined so much of my life. Robert died 6 weeks later. I attended the funeral, not for him, but for our children, who were struggling with their complex feelings about their father's legacy. I sat in the back, holding my granddaughter's hand, watching as they buried the man who had been both my greatest love and my greatest betrayal. After the service, as family and friends shared memories of Robert at his best, I drove home to my lake house. I sat on my dock with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the water in brilliant colors, and thought about the life I'd built from the ashes of that betrayal. My name is Maria Marshall. I am 75 years old, and I live alone by choice in a house I bought with money I reclaimed from a man who tried to steal my future. I have friends who respect me, work that fulfills me, and the absolute certainty that I will never again allow anyone to diminish my worth. My story didn't end when my husband betrayed me. It began again, stronger and truer than before. And every day, I help other women discover that their stories don't have to end either. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with betrayal is refuse to let it be your ending. Make it your beginning instead.